Story number 1. Whispers in the Snow. Winter in Maine was unforgiving. The Appalachian Trail, a lifeline for hikers seeking solitude and adventure, transformed into a frozen labyrinth of snow-covered trees and icy winds. I had always been drawn to the trail's rugged beauty, the promise of escaping the chaos of everyday life and immersing myself in nature's stark tranquility. This year, however, my solo trek promised something far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. I was a seasoned hiker, accustomed to the challenges of the trail and the solitude it offered. Packing my gear meticulously, I set out in early December, eager to embrace the winter solitude that Maine's wilderness provided. The first few days were everything I had hoped for: pristine snow, serene landscapes, and the comforting silence broken only by the crunch of my boots and the distant call of a lone owl. By the third night, the temperature had plummeted, and the snow thickened, blanketing the trail in an oppressive stillness. I had pitched my tent in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines, the perfect spot to rest and regroup before the long hike ahead. As I settled into my sleeping bag, the wind howled outside, a mournful sound that seemed to echo through the forest. Around midnight, a faint whispering reached my ears, a soft murmur that seemed to emanate from the very trees themselves. I sat up, trying to pinpoint the source, but the whispers remained elusive, blending seamlessly with the sounds of the storm outside. Probably just the wind, I thought, pulling my blanket tighter around me. But the whispers persisted, growing slightly louder and more distinct. They sounded like fragments of a conversation, hushed voices discussing something important just out of earshot. My heart began to race as an uneasy feeling settled over me. I convinced myself it was merely the wind playing tricks on my mind, exacerbated by the isolation and cold. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a serene but deceptive calm. I unpacked my gear and resumed my hike, the trail now gleaming under the pale winter sun. As I trekked deeper into the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the lingering echo of the previous night's whispers haunting my thoughts. Late in the afternoon, I decided to take a break by a frozen stream, the ice shimmering like glass under the weak sunlight. As I sat there, sipping my lukewarm coffee, I noticed something unusual: a series of large footprints imprinted in the fresh snow, leading straight into the denser part of the forest. They were unlike any animal tracks I had seen before, massive, with deep claw marks and an irregular shape that suggested something far more sinister. Intrigued and unnerved, I decided to follow the trail, my curiosity overcoming my apprehension. The footprints led me through thick brush and over hidden streams, the forest growing darker and more foreboding with each step. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the snow, I realized how easily I could become lost in this vast, icy wilderness. Night fell swiftly, and the temperature dropped even further. I made my way back to my tent, the trail behind me now obscured by the encroaching darkness. As I approached my campsite, the unease returned, amplified by the memory of the footprints and the whispers that seemed to follow me. I set up my tent quickly, the sense of dread making it hard to shake off the lingering fear. That night, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent than before. They seemed to circle around my tent, voices overlapping in a cacophony of ghostly chatter. My heart pounded as I lay there, trying to ignore the sounds that pierced the night. Just as I was beginning to drift into a restless sleep, a loud thud echoed through the forest, followed by the sound of heavy breathing outside my tent. Panic surged through me as I reached for my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness as I cautiously unzipped the tent. To my horror, I saw a shadowy figure standing just outside, its outline barely visible against the snowy backdrop. The figure remained still for a moment before it began to move, its presence sending a chill down my spine. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling with fear. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it started to pace back and forth, the snow crunching under its heavy footsteps. I backed away, my mind racing with thoughts of wild animals or someone else seeking shelter from the storm. But something about the figure felt wrong, unnatural. Suddenly, the temperature inside the tent dropped drastically, my breath visible in the freezing air. I felt an invisible hand brush against my shoulder, a cold touch that sent shivers down my spine. I whipped around, shining my flashlight in every direction, but there was no one there. The whispers intensified, now accompanied by faint, mournful sobs that echoed through the night. Terrified, I pulled my blanket tightly around me, my body trembling uncontrollably. The figure outside continued to pace, its presence a constant reminder of the haunting sounds that plagued my mind. I couldn't sleep, the fear keeping me wide awake as the night dragged on interminably. In the early hours of the morning, just as the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, the figure made one final, deliberate step towards my tent. I held my breath, anticipating the worst, but to my astonishment, it simply stopped at the entrance, its form beginning to fade into the snowy morning air. The whispers and sobs ceased abruptly, leaving behind an oppressive silence that felt almost sacred. Exhausted and shaken, I packed up my gear and continued my hike, the trail now bathed in the soft light of day. But the memory of that night lingered, the sense of being watched and the haunting whispers never leaving my mind. Determined to find some answers, I decided to retrace my steps the following day, hoping to uncover the source of the mysterious footprints and the ghostly presence that had terrorized me. The second day of my hike was marked by a mix of determination and lingering fear. I retraced the trail of footprints, the fresh snow now slightly sloping down the trail, making my way deeper into the heart of the forest. Hours passed without incident, the beauty of the winter landscape gradually restoring a sense of calm within me. But as the afternoon sun began to wane, the whispers returned, faint but unmistakable, guiding me towards an old, forgotten cabin nestled among the trees. The cabin was a relic of a bygone era, its wooden structure withered and worn by the harsh winter elements. The door hung off its hinges, the windows frosted over, and the roof sagged under the weight of the snow. Despite its dilapidated state, there was an eerie allure to the place, a silent invitation to uncover the secrets hidden within its walls. I approached cautiously, the whispers growing louder as I neared the cabin. The door creaked open with a push, revealing a dark, empty interior. The air inside was thick with the scent of decay and old wood, the remnants of a life long gone scattered throughout the room. I stepped inside, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating the remnants of furniture and old, tattered curtains swaying gently in the cold breeze. As I explored the cabin, the whispers seemed to surround me, the voices intertwining in a sorrowful chorus that filled the room with an overwhelming sense of sadness. I couldn't help but feel that the spirits of those who had perished in the snow were still trapped here, their sorrow and despair echoing through the frozen halls. In the center of the cabin stood an old, wooden table, its surface covered in a thick layer of dust and cobwebs. On the table lay a faded photograph, its edges frayed and torn, depicting a group of people dressed in vintage winter clothing. Among them was a woman in a striking red dress, her face serene yet filled with an unspoken sadness. As I reached out to touch the photograph, the temperature in the room dropped further, the air growing thick with an oppressive chill. The whispers ceased abruptly, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed down on me like a physical weight. I felt a sudden presence behind me, an invisible force pressing against my back, making it difficult to breathe. I turned around slowly, my flashlight beam revealing a ghostly figure standing just a few feet away. It was the woman from the photograph, her face pale and hollow, her eyes empty voids that seemed to stare right through me. She raised her hand, pointing towards the window, her mouth opening in a silent plea. "You shouldn't be here," her voice echoed in my mind, a cold, mournful whisper that sent a chill down my spine. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest as I struggled to comprehend what was happening. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I didn't mean to intrude. I just wanted to understand." The woman extended her hand, her eyes pleading for something beyond my understanding. "Return what was lost," she whispered, her voice filled with a deep, sorrowful longing. Confused and desperate to help, I scanned the room for any clues. My eyes fell upon an old, withered journal lying on the table, its pages yellowed with age. I picked it up, flipping through the brittle pages until I found an entry dated December 3, 1947. The writing was shaky, filled with emotion and fear, recounting the tragic loss of lives in a sudden snowstorm that had overwhelmed the cabin. The entry spoke of a group of travelers who had sought refuge in the cabin during the storm, only to be besieged by the relentless blizzard. Supplies had dwindled, and desperation had set in as hope faded. The last entry was a plea for forgiveness, a desperate attempt to communicate with the spirits of those who had perished. Realizing the depth of their sorrow and the need for closure, I knew what I had to do. I reached out to the ghostly woman, holding the journal in my hands. "I want to help you," I said softly. "Tell me what you need." Her eyes met mine, a flicker of hope shining through the emptiness. Bring peace to our souls, she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. Let us rest. Determined to honor their memory, I made my way back to the cabin the following day, the journal clutched tightly in my hands. I organized a small memorial, gathering candles and fresh flowers to lay beside the old photograph. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the snow-covered landscape, I stood before the table, reciting the words of forgiveness and remembrance from the journal. As I spoke, the temperature in the cabin began to rise, the oppressive chill giving way to a sense of warmth and tranquility. The whispers returned, but this time they were gentle, filled with gratitude and peace. The ghostly figure of the woman in red stood beside me, her eyes no longer hollow but filled with a serene light. Thank you, she whispered, her voice filled with relief. You have given us peace. With those final words, the spirits began to fade, their forms dissolving into the warm evening air. The cabin, once a place of sorrow and tragedy, now felt like a sanctuary of remembrance and honor. The whispers ceased, replaced by the gentle rustle of the trees and the soft fall of snowflakes outside. As I left the cabin, the snow-covered trail ahead seemed brighter, the oppressive fears that had haunted me now replaced by a profound sense of accomplishment and closure. The spirits of those lost in the winter storm had found their peace, their echoes forever preserved in the silent embrace of the Appalachian wilderness. Years have passed since that transformative night, and I've continued my solo hikes, always mindful of the legends that whisper through the snow-covered trails. The story of the haunted cabin and the ghostly woman in red has become a part of my personal lore, a testament to the enduring power of compassion and the human spirit's capacity to bring peace to restless souls. Sometimes, when the winter winds howl through the trees and the snow blankets the trail in pristine white, I catch a glimpse of a red dress swaying gently in the distance. A silent guardian watching over the Appalachian Trail with eyes that now hold only peace and gratitude. And I know that some souls find their way home, their whispers forever lingering in the silent snow, waiting to be remembered and honored by those who dare to seek the truth. Story number 2. The Man Without a Shadow. Winter in Yellowstone was both majestic and merciless. The snow blanketed the vast expanse of the park, muting the vibrant hues of the evergreens and turning the rugged trails into treacherous paths. The temperature had plummeted below zero, the biting cold making every breath a visible puff in the frigid air. Despite the harsh conditions, I found solace in the solitude of the wilderness, the silence a stark contrast to the chaos of everyday life. This trip, however, would etch itself into my memory as a haunting reminder of the thin line between reality and the supernatural. I'm Alex Mitchell, an avid hiker and freelance writer with a penchant for exploring the untamed corners of America's national parks. My friends, Jenna and Mark, shared my love for adventure, and together we had mapped out a challenging overnight trek through one of Yellowstone's less frequented trails. Our goal was simple: to immerse ourselves in nature, document the untouched beauty, and return with stories of our journey. We set out on a clear Friday afternoon, the sun casting long shadows across the snow-covered ground. The trail we chose was narrow, winding through dense forests and over frozen streams, the landscape both beautiful and foreboding. As we hiked deeper into the park, the sounds of civilization faded, replaced by the crunch of our boots on the snow and the occasional call of a distant bird. By early evening, we reached our designated campsite, a secluded clearing surrounded by towering pines. We set up our tents, the process familiar and routine, before building a fire to thaw our frozen gear and warm our chilled bones. The fire crackled and danced, its warmth a welcome respite from the oppressive cold. As night descended, the temperature dropped further, the darkness bringing with it an eerie stillness that seemed to envelop the entire forest. We settled into our tents, the sounds of the night blending into a symphony of whispers and rustles. Jenna and Mark drifted into a restless sleep, while I found myself unable to shake off a lingering unease. The stories of our trip, the tales of mysterious sightings and unexplained phenomena in Yellowstone, played on a loop in my mind. I tried to dismiss them, attributing the unease to the isolation and the harsh winter conditions, but deep down, a sense of foreboding gnawed at me. Around midnight, a faint light flickered through the trees, the moon's reflection shimmering on the snow-covered ground. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, trying to discern what had captured my attention. The light seemed to move, growing brighter and more defined as it approached the trail. My heart quickened as I realized it was a figure, an elderly man dressed in a heavy coat, standing alone on the narrow path. "Hello?" I called out softly, the sound of my voice sounding foreign in the stillness of the night. The man paused, his head bowed low, avoiding my gaze. His presence was unnerving, the way he seemed out of place in the modern wilderness. Summoning my courage, I decided to approach, the firelight casting long, eerie shadows that danced with each step I took. As I drew closer, the man looked up, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes hollow voids that seemed to stare right through me. "Can I share your fire?" he asked, his voice a raspy whisper that sent chills down my spine. Jenna and Mark stirred in their tents, but I motioned for them to stay quiet, not wanting to escalate the situation. "Of course," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's plenty to go around." He nodded, stepping into the glow of our campfire, but something was off. There was no shadow under his feet, no reflection in the snow that should have been there. My flashlight flickered, casting an intermittent beam that made it difficult to focus. The man sat down quietly, his presence unsettling in the already tense atmosphere. We sat in silence, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the howling wind outside. The man never spoke again, his eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the trees. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, a sense of being watched that made my skin crawl. After what felt like hours, the man rose abruptly, his movements stiff and unnatural. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice now carrying a note of relief that contrasted sharply with his earlier demeanor. Before I could respond, he turned and began to walk away, his figure moving swiftly into the darkness. I followed, curiosity overcoming my fear, until I reached the edge of our campsite. The man stopped, looking back at me with those hollow eyes, and then vanished into the night as if swallowed by the very shadows that clung to the trees. Shaken, I returned to my tent, the encounter replaying in my mind. Jenna and Mark awoke, sensing my distress, but I couldn't bring myself to speak. The next morning, as the first light of dawn pierced through the trees, we packed up and prepared to leave, eager to put the unsettling night behind us. But as we broke camp, a realization dawned on me. There were more footprints in the fresh snow leading away from our site, footprints that were not ours. They were larger, deeper, and unmistakably human, but with a distorted shape that suggested something far more sinister. My heart pounded as I followed the trail, the footprints leading us into the denser part of the forest, away from the safety of our trail. "Jenna, Mark, do you see this?" I asked, my voice trembling. They nodded, their faces pale with fear as we continued to follow the footprints. The trail led us to a small clearing, the center dominated by an old, weathered log that served as a makeshift bench. Sitting on it was the same man from the night before, his face now twisted into a grotesque mask of sorrow and anger. His eyes burned with an unnatural intensity, and his hands were outstretched as if begging for something or someone. "Why are you doing this?" Mark whispered, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. The man didn't respond, but the air around him grew thick with a palpable sense of malice. Without warning, the ground beneath us began to tremble, the snow cracking and shifting as if the forest itself was reacting to the presence of the restless spirit. I felt a surge of fear and desperation, the realization that we were no longer alone in this frozen wilderness. Suddenly, the temperature dropped further, the chill seeping into my bones despite my layers of clothing. I turned to run, but the footprints we had followed now led back to our campsite, creating an endless loop that trapped us in this nightmarish scenario. Panic set in as we realized we were being toyed with, the spirit manipulating the environment to keep us from escaping. "Run!" I shouted, my voice hoarse with fear. We sprinted through the snow-covered trails, the man's laughter echoing through the trees, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. The footprints continued to follow us, an ever-present reminder of the ghostly presence that sought to claim us as part of its eternal torment. No matter how fast we ran, the trail led us back to the clearing, the man standing there with his hollow eyes fixed on us. Desperate and exhausted, we collapsed onto the cold ground, the snow enveloping us in a frozen embrace. The man approached, his form now blending with the shadows, his eyes piercing through the darkness. "You shouldn't have stayed," he whispered, his voice a chilling reminder of the night's horrors. With a final, agonized cry, the man vanished, the snow settling around us in a heavy silence. We lay there, our breaths visible in the cold air, the weight of our encounter pressing down on us like a physical burden. The morning sun rose, casting a weak light over the snow-covered trail, but the memory of that night lingered, a haunting reminder of the restless spirits that dwell in Yellowstone's frozen wilderness. We made our way back to civilization, the journey back marked by the lingering fear and the realization that some places hold secrets too dark to uncover. The footprints we had followed were still visible, a silent testament to the encounter that had nearly claimed our lives. As we reached the trailhead, the sun climbing higher in the sky, we couldn't help but look back, the shadows of the forest stretching out before us like the arms of a vengeful spirit. In the years that followed, the story of our encounter spread through the hiking community, the tale of the man without a shadow becoming a cautionary legend for those who dared to venture into Yellowstone's winter wilderness. I continued to hike, each trek a reminder of the night we faced the supernatural and survived to tell the tale. The experience left an indelible mark on me, a constant reminder of the thin veil that separates our world from the restless spirits that seek to claim the living as their own. Sometimes, when the snow falls thick and the wind whispers through the trees, I catch a glimpse of a figure in the distance, a man in a heavy coat, his head bowed, moving through the snow without a shadow. My heart races, the memory of that night resurfacing with every fleeting sight. And I know that some spirits never find peace, forever wandering the endless, unforgiving wilderness, their whispers echoing through the snow, waiting to ensnare the next unwary traveler. Story number 3. Shadow on the Cliff. Winter in Arizona was a cruel mistress, especially in the unforgiving expanse of the Grand Canyon. The Bright Angel Trail, renowned for its breathtaking vistas and challenging ascents, transformed into a treacherous path when snow cloaked its rugged terrain. The usually vibrant hues of the canyon gave way to monochromatic whites and grays, the silence only broken by the whistle of the cold wind and the crunch of footsteps on icy ground. I've always been drawn to the wilderness, the solitude of nature offering a stark contrast to the chaos of urban life. Hiking had become my sanctuary, a way to escape and find clarity amidst the towering cliffs and endless skies. This year, however, my solo trek along the Bright Angel Trail promised to test more than just my physical endurance. It would confront me with shadows from beyond the veil of reality. It was late December when I decided to embark on the journey. Friends and fellow hikers often spoke of the trail's beauty, but few ventured out during the winter months. The allure of solitude and the challenge of navigating the snow-covered path outweighed the warnings of unpredictable weather and the inherent dangers of the canyon. I was well prepared, armed with the necessary gear, maps, and a sturdy spirit to face whatever lay ahead. The first few days were everything I had hoped for. The trail, though covered in snow, revealed hidden facets of the canyon I had never seen before. Frosted pine trees stood like sentinels, their branches heavy with ice, and the frozen Colorado River below shimmered under the pale winter sun. Each evening, I set up camp in a secluded spot, the serenity of the canyon at night providing a profound sense of peace. On the third night, as darkness settled and the temperature plummeted, I found myself enveloped in a stillness that was both comforting and unsettling. The fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows across my tent, while the wind outside howled like a chorus of lost souls. I drifted into a restless sleep, the sounds of the wilderness lulling me into a dreamless slumber. Around midnight, a faint whispering reached my ears, barely audible over the storm outside. I sat up, straining to listen, but the whispers remained elusive, blending seamlessly with the sounds of the wind and the crackling fire. Shaking off the unease, I settled back into my sleeping bag, telling myself it was just the wind playing tricks on my mind. But the whispers persisted, growing slightly louder and more distinct. They sounded like fragments of a conversation, hushed voices discussing something urgent just out of reach. My heart began to race as an inexplicable fear took hold, a sense of being watched that made my skin crawl. I reached for my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness as I cautiously unzipped my tent and stepped outside. The cold air bit at my face, and I wrapped my coat tighter around me, trying to locate the source of the whispers. As I scanned the snow-covered trail, my flashlight caught movement, a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the cliff, its form barely visible against the vast expanse of the canyon. My breath caught in my throat as I realized the figure was staring directly down into the abyss below. "Hello?" I called out softly, my voice barely more than a whisper. The figure remained motionless, its presence both haunting and inexplicably sad. Summoning my courage, I took a step closer, the snow crunching under my boots with each tentative move. As I approached, the figure began to shift, its form becoming more defined. It was an elderly man, dressed in a vintage coat that seemed out of place in the modern wilderness. His face was pale and gaunt, eyes hollow and empty, yet they burned with an unnatural red glow that pierced through the darkness. The sight of him sent a chill down my spine, the sense of dread intensifying with every step I took. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my efforts to remain calm. The man didn't respond, his eyes fixed intently on something far below the cliff. I took another step forward, the air around us growing colder, the wind picking up as if reacting to his presence. Suddenly, the man stood up abruptly, his movements stiff and unnatural. He began to walk away, his figure fading into the shadows as he disappeared from sight. I watched in confusion, my mind racing to comprehend what had just happened. As I turned to return to my tent, a sinking feeling settled in my stomach, a sense that something terrible was about to unfold. I hurried back to my campsite, the darkness seeming to close in around me. The trail now appeared to be shrouded in an oppressive gloom, the once clear path now obscured by shadows that danced and twisted with a life of their own. The whispers had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that pressed down on me like a physical weight. Sleep eluded me that night, the encounter with the shadowy figure haunting my every thought. As dawn broke, painting the snow-covered canyon with hues of pink and gold, I gathered my gear, determined to press on despite the lingering fear. The morning air was crisp, the sun's rays glinting off the ice and creating a mesmerizing, almost surreal landscape. As I resumed my hike, the sense of being watched never left me. Every rustle of the trees and every distant call of a bird seemed magnified, echoing in the vast silence of the canyon. Hours passed without incident, the beauty of the winter wilderness gradually restoring a sense of calm within me. But as I neared the halfway point of the trail, a realization dawned on me. There were footprints in the fresh snow, leading away from my campsite and into the dense forest. I stopped, my heart pounding as I followed the trail, the footprints growing larger and more irregular with each step. They were unlike any animal tracks I had seen before, massive, with deep claw marks and an irregular shape that suggested something far more sinister. My mind raced, recalling the stories of hikers who had vanished without a trace, their fates lost to the unforgiving wilderness. Determined to find answers, I continued down the trail, the footprints leading me deeper into the heart of the canyon. The forest grew denser, the snow-covered trees towering above me like ancient guardians of a forgotten realm. The temperature dropped further, the cold now a biting reminder of the peril I faced. As dusk approached, the trail became increasingly treacherous, the snow turning into ice that made each step a precarious endeavor. Just when I thought I couldn't continue any further, I stumbled upon a small, abandoned campsite, an eerie echo of my own setup from days before. The remnants of a fire pit lay cold and empty, and scattered belongings were partially buried in the snow, hinting at the presence of someone who had been here long ago. In the center of the campsite stood a large, broken log, serving as a makeshift bench. On it rested an old, tattered map, its edges frayed and torn from years of exposure to the elements. I picked it up, examining the faded lines and markings that traced the familiar path of the Bright Angel Trail. My fingers brushed against a photograph taped to the map, a black and white image of a man in a vintage coat, standing proudly on the very cliff where I had encountered the shadowy figure. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the truth. This was the same man. The map had been left behind, a silent testament to the tragedy that had unfolded here decades ago. The whispers, the shadows, the footprints, all signs pointing to a restless spirit bound to the trail, unable to move on after a fateful night that claimed his life and those around him. As night fell once more, I made my way back to my campsite, the map clutched tightly in my hands. The temperature plummeted, the snow swirling around me in a relentless dance. As I settled into my tent, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent than before. They seemed to circle around me, voices overlapping in a haunting chorus that filled the space with an overwhelming sense of sorrow and despair. Sleep eluded me, the fear of encountering the spirit again keeping me awake. Hours passed in restless wakefulness, the darkness pressing down on me like a suffocating blanket. Just as the first light of dawn began to creep into the sky, a faint sound pierced the silence, a soft, mournful whisper that seemed to emanate from the very walls of my tent. "Help us!" My heart raced as I reached for my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness and illuminating the snow-covered ground outside. There, standing at the edge of my tent, was the shadowy figure once more, the man in the vintage coat, his face pale and gaunt, eyes burning with an unnatural red glow. He raised his hand, a silent plea for assistance that sent a shiver down my spine. Summoning every ounce of courage, I stepped outside, the cold air biting at my skin as I faced the spirit directly. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. The man stared at me, his hollow eyes filled with an unbearable sadness. "You must remember us," he said, his voice echoing through the silent canyon. "Our stories must be told." Determined to help, I nodded, understanding that this encounter was more than a mere haunting. It was a plea for remembrance and closure. I took out the map and the photograph, holding them up for him to see. "Tell me what happened," I urged, my voice steady despite the fear that still gripped me. The man's form began to shift, his features becoming clearer as he recounted the tragic tale of the night the snowstorm had struck the canyon. He spoke of a group of hikers, like me, who had ventured out seeking solitude and adventure. The storm had caught them off guard, trapping them in the frozen wilderness with dwindling supplies and mounting despair. One by one, they succumbed to the cold, their spirits bound to the trail by the tragedy that had unfolded. As he spoke, the atmosphere around me grew heavy with sorrow, the very air thick with the weight of lost lives and unspoken regrets. The man's eyes, once burning with an unnatural light, now held a glimmer of hope and gratitude. "Thank you for remembering us," he whispered, his voice filled with a sense of peace that contrasted sharply with the horror of the past. With those final words, his form began to dissolve into the morning light, the oppressive darkness lifting as the spirits found the closure they had long been denied. The trail, once a site of fear and tragedy, now felt like a place of remembrance and honor for those who had lost their lives in the unforgiving winter wilderness. As I walked away from the campsite, the first rays of dawn breaking through the snow-covered canyon, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment and closure. The whispers and shadows that had haunted me were now a part of the canyon's history, a testament to the enduring power of memory and the human spirit's capacity for compassion. Years have passed since that transformative winter trek, and I've continued my hikes, each journey a reminder of the night I faced the shadows and helped restless spirits find their way to peace. The story of the man without a shadow and the lost souls of the Bright Angel Trail has become a part of my personal lore, a haunting yet beautiful reminder of the thin veil that separates our world from the unknown. Sometimes, when the snow falls thick and the wind whispers through the canyon, I catch a glimpse of a shadowy figure standing at the edge of a cliff, his eyes no longer hollow but filled with a serene light. My heart swells with a mixture of awe and gratitude, knowing that some souls find their way home, their echoes forever preserved in the silent embrace of Yellowstone's winter wilderness. And so, as I continue my hikes through the untamed beauty of the Grand Canyon, I carry with me the lessons learned from that fateful night, the importance of remembering those who have lost their lives, the power of compassion to bridge the gap between the living and the dead, and the enduring hope that even in the darkest moments, there is a chance for peace and closure. Story number 4. The Woman in the White Dress. Winter in Glacier National Park was a relentless force, an unyielding blanket of snow and ice that transformed the majestic wilderness into a desolate, frozen expanse. I had always been drawn to the solitude and beauty of nature, finding solace in the quiet whispers of the towering pines and the crisp bite of the winter air. Hiking alone was my sanctuary, a way to escape the chaos of everyday life and confront the lingering shadows of my past. I'm Nathan Collins, a 34-year-old freelance photographer with a penchant for capturing the untamed beauty of America's national parks. This winter, I decided to embark on a solo trek along one of Glacier's lesser-known trails, seeking both inspiration and the peace that only isolation can provide. The trail was notorious among locals for its treacherous conditions and the unexplained disappearances that had plagued it for decades. Stories of lost hikers and eerie apparitions were common, but I dismissed them as mere folklore until the night I met her. The first few days were everything I had hoped for. The trail wound through pristine forests, over frozen streams, and past snow-covered meadows that sparkled under the pale winter sun. Each evening, I set up camp in a secluded clearing, the serenity of the surroundings allowing me to immerse myself fully in my work. But as the days grew shorter and the nights longer, an unspoken tension began to settle over the trail, a sense of something lurking just beyond the edge of my vision. On the fourth night, as dusk gave way to darkness, I found myself enveloped in an oppressive silence. The only sounds were the distant howling of the wind and the crackling of my campfire. I had just settled into my sleeping bag when I heard it, a faint whispering that seemed to float on the icy breeze. At first, I thought it was the wind playing tricks on my mind, but the whispers grew louder, more distinct, forming words that sent a chill down my spine. "Don't follow her." I sat up, heart pounding, trying to locate the source of the voice. The whispers seemed to emanate from the surrounding trees, their branches heavy with snow, casting long, eerie shadows across the clearing. I strained my ears, but the voices faded as quickly as they had appeared, leaving me with an unsettling sense of dread. Unable to shake off the unease, I decided to take a short walk around the perimeter of my campsite, the snow crunching under my boots. The moon hung high in the sky, its silvery light casting a ghostly glow over the landscape. As I rounded a frozen boulder, I saw her, a woman in a flowing white dress, standing alone on the trail. She was barefoot, her feet sinking slightly into the fresh snow, and her dress billowed gently in the frigid wind. Her presence was both haunting and serene, a spectral figure that seemed out of place in the frozen wilderness. She stood motionless, staring ahead with an expression that was impossible to read. Without a word, she raised her hand and pointed forward, her gesture silent but unmistakable. I felt a strange compulsion to follow, an inexplicable urge that tugged at my very soul. Despite the fear that coiled in my stomach, I began to walk in the direction she had indicated, my flashlight cutting through the darkness as I moved deeper into the night. The trail ahead seemed to twist and turn unnaturally, the familiar path morphing into a maze of ice-covered rocks and overgrown trees. My breath came in visible puffs, the cold air biting at my lungs, but I pressed on, driven by a force I couldn't comprehend. The woman in white stayed just ahead of me, her form flickering like a mirage in the night. Each step I took seemed to bring her closer, her silent presence a constant reminder of the unknown. After what felt like hours, I reached a clearing that had no exit, only large boulders and trees encased in thick layers of ice. The landscape here was desolate, the snow unbroken except for the footprints that I and the woman had left behind. I turned to find her gone, but in her place stood only an expanse of frozen wilderness. The laughter that followed was soft and distant, echoing through the trees like the cries of lost souls. Panic surged through me as I realized I was trapped in a no-man's land, the path leading back to my campsite obscured by the relentless snowfall. I stumbled forward, desperately trying to find a way out, but the trail seemed to mock my efforts, the footprints leading me in circles until I was once again back at the same clearing. Exhausted and disoriented, I collapsed onto the cold ground, the weight of my ordeal pressing down on me. The night was unforgiving, the cold seeping into my bones, and the laughter seemed to follow me, a haunting reminder of the woman who had led me astray. I curled into a ball, trying to conserve my body heat, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. Just as I began to drift into a restless sleep, I felt a sudden shift in the air, the temperature dropping even further. A figure appeared outside my tent, the moonlight revealing the silhouette of a woman in a white dress. Her face was pale and gaunt, her eyes hollow voids that seemed to stare right through me. I sat up abruptly, heart pounding, as she stepped closer, her presence filling the tent with an oppressive darkness. "Don't follow her," she whispered, her voice cold and hollow. "Never follow her." Before I could respond, she vanished into thin air, leaving me with a chilling sense of abandonment and fear. The rest of the night was a blur of nightmares and restless sleep, the memory of her warning etched into my mind like a scar. The next morning, I awoke to find my tent battered and torn, the remnants of the previous night's ordeal scattered across the snow-covered ground. Shivering uncontrollably, I packed up my gear and made my way back along the trail, the footprints leading me away from the cursed clearing. As I hiked, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see the woman in white lurking in the shadows, but she was nowhere to be found. When I finally reached the edge of the trail, the sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the frozen landscape. The laughter that had haunted me the night before was now a distant echo, fading into the distance as I made my way back to civilization. The experience left me shaken, the lines between reality and the supernatural blurred in a way I couldn't fully comprehend. Determined to uncover the truth behind the mysterious woman and the tragic events that had transpired on the trail, I delved into the history of Glacier National Park. I spoke with local historians, old hikers, and park rangers, piecing together fragments of stories that had been passed down through generations. It became clear that the trail I had hiked was the site of a tragic accident decades ago. A group of hikers had been caught in a sudden snowstorm, their lives claimed by the unforgiving wilderness. Among them was a woman named Eleanor Whitaker, known for her kindness and unwavering spirit. Legend had it that Eleanor had led her group to safety, but the storm had overwhelmed them, leaving many lost in the blinding snow. Her spirit, unable to find peace, was said to wander the trail, a guardian watching over the lost souls who dared to trek its icy path. The woman in white was none other than Eleanor, her presence a manifestation of her eternal vigil and sorrow. Armed with this knowledge, I felt a responsibility to honor Eleanor's memory and help her find the closure she so desperately sought. I decided to return to the trail, equipped with candles, flowers, and a heartfelt message of remembrance. The journey back was fraught with the same challenges as before, the cold biting at my skin and the trail seemingly more treacherous than ever. But this time, my purpose was clear. I was here to bring peace to a restless spirit. As dusk settled once more, I reached the clearing where I had first encountered Eleanor. The moon hung high in the sky, its silvery light casting a serene glow over the snow-covered landscape. I set up a small memorial, lighting candles and placing flowers beside the remnants of the old campsite. "Eleanor," I whispered, my voice steady despite the lingering fear. "I'm here to honor your memory and help you find peace." The air grew still, the oppressive darkness lifting as the candle's flames flickered softly. I felt a presence beside me, a warmth that contrasted sharply with the cold that had plagued me. Slowly, the woman in white appeared, her face now serene, her eyes no longer hollow but filled with gratitude and peace. She nodded softly, a gesture of acceptance, before her form began to dissolve into the night air, the snowflakes carrying her spirit away like the whispers of a long-forgotten sorrow. Relief washed over me as I watched Eleanor's spirit fade into the darkness, the trail now feeling like a place of remembrance rather than fear. The whispers and shadows that had haunted me were replaced by a sense of closure and tranquility, a testament to the enduring power of compassion and understanding. As I made my way back to my campsite, the first rays of dawn began to illuminate the trail, casting a warm glow over the once-frozen landscape. The laughter that had echoed through the night was now a distant memory, replaced by the gentle sounds of nature awakening. I knew that Eleanor had found the peace she had sought, her spirit finally free from the endless cycle of loss and sorrow. Years have passed since that transformative winter trek, and I've continued my hikes, each journey a reminder of the night I faced the supernatural and helped a restless spirit find her way to peace. The story of Eleanor Whitaker and the woman in the white dress has become a part of my personal lore, a haunting yet beautiful reminder of the thin veil that separates our world from the unknown. Sometimes, when the snow falls thick and the wind whispers through the towering pines, I catch a glimpse of a white dress swaying gently in the distance. A silent guardian watching over the trail with eyes that now hold only peace and gratitude. My heart swells with a mixture of awe and respect, knowing that some souls find their way home, their echoes forever preserved in the silent embrace of Glacier's winter wilderness. And so, as I continue my solitary hikes through the untamed beauty of Yellowstone's snowy trails, I carry with me the lessons learned from that fateful night, the importance of honoring the past, the power of empathy to bridge the gap between the living and the dead, and the enduring hope that even in the darkest moments, there is a chance for peace and closure. Story number 5. The Child in the Forest. Winter in Rocky Mountain National Park was a time when the world seemed to hold its breath. The towering pines and rugged peaks, usually vibrant with the life of summer and autumn, were cloaked in thick blankets of snow, transforming the landscape into a vast, silent expanse of white. The trails, once bustling with hikers and adventurers, became narrow, winding paths that disappeared into the endless forest. It was during these cold, silent months that the park held its most profound mysteries, whispered about in hushed tones by those who dared to explore its frozen depths. I'm Daniel Harris, an avid hiker and freelance writer with a passion for uncovering the untold stories of America's national parks. This winter, I decided to embark on a solo trek through Rocky Mountain National Park, seeking both solitude and inspiration for my next book. The trail I chose was one of the less traveled paths, a narrow route that meandered through dense forests and over frozen streams. It was perfect for someone like me, who craved both the beauty and the isolation that only the wilderness could provide. The first few days of my hike were everything I had hoped for. The pristine snow underfoot crunched softly with each step, and the air was crisp and invigorating. Each evening, I set up camp in a secluded clearing, the warmth of my tent a stark contrast to the biting cold outside. I spent my days photographing the stunning vistas, writing notes in my journal, and enjoying the serene silence that enveloped me. But as the days grew shorter and the nights longer, an unspoken tension began to settle over the trail. The isolation, combined with the harsh winter conditions, started to play tricks on my mind. I dismissed the feeling as mere exhaustion, a byproduct of the relentless cold and the physical demands of the hike. Yet, there was something more, a lingering sense of being watched, a presence that seemed to follow me through the snow-covered trees. It was on the fourth night that everything changed. I had just settled into my sleeping bag, the flickering light of my lantern casting long, eerie shadows across the tent walls. The wind howled outside, a mournful sound that seemed to echo through the silent forest. As I drifted into a restless sleep, a faint sound reached my ears, a soft, plaintive crying that seemed to come from the heart of the forest. At first, I thought it was the wind playing tricks on my senses, but the crying persisted, growing slightly louder and more distinct. I sat up, my heart pounding in my chest, and listened intently. The sound was unmistakable, a child's cry, filled with anguish and fear, echoing through the night. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake off the unease, but the sound remained, persistent and haunting. Against my better judgment, I decided to investigate. Grabbing my lantern and a sturdy walking stick, I stepped out of the tent, the cold air biting at my skin. The moon was a thin crescent in the sky, providing only a faint glow that made the snow-covered landscape shimmer like a sea of diamonds. I followed the sound, my footsteps crunching loudly in the stillness. The trail led me deeper into the forest, the snow now falling more heavily, muffling the sounds around me. The crying grew louder, more urgent, guiding me towards an old, snow-covered trail marker. As I approached, I saw her, a small child sitting alone beneath the root of a massive pine tree. She was dressed in an old-fashioned coat, the fabric worn and tattered, and her bare feet were frozen to the ground. Her tiny frame shivered violently, the cold rendering her rigid. I knelt down beside her, my heart aching at the sight. "Hey there, are you okay?" I asked softly, extending a hand to help her up. She looked up, her face pale and gaunt, eyes empty voids that held no warmth or recognition. There was nothing there, no pupils, no irises, just deep, dark hollows where her eyes should have been. Her mouth was sealed, no hint of emotion or sound escaping her lips. The sight sent a chill down my spine, the supernatural nature of the encounter undeniable. "I need your help," she seemed to say, though her voice was non-existent. Her finger pointed ahead, towards a dense thicket of trees that loomed ominously in the darkness. I stood up, my instincts telling me to leave, to run back to the safety of my tent. But something held me in place, a mix of fear, curiosity, and a deep-seated need to understand. I glanced around, ensuring no one else was near, then took a step towards the direction she indicated. The trail ahead was narrow, winding through the thick forest until it opened up into a small clearing. The moonlight illuminated a scene straight out of a nightmare, a circle of large, ancient rocks, partially buried in snow, creating an unnatural boundary. In the center stood an old wooden bench, cracked and worn by time, as if it had witnessed countless stories unfold over the years. I felt a sudden drop in temperature, the air growing thick with an oppressive presence. The crying ceased, replaced by an eerie silence that pressed down on me like a physical weight. The child's gaze remained fixed on me, her hollow eyes following my every move. "Don't follow her," a deep, resonant voice echoed through the clearing, sending a shiver down my spine. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, a spectral warning that made my blood run cold. I spun around, trying to locate the source of the voice, but there was no one there, only the shadowy outline of the trees and the circle of rocks. My heart raced as I realized that the child had vanished, leaving me alone in the frozen clearing with the lingering presence of something malevolent. Panic surged through me as I turned to leave, the path back to my tent now obscured by the swirling snow. The trail markers were gone, the path seemingly erased by the relentless storm. I stumbled forward, my breath visible in the cold air, but the forest seemed to close in around me, the trees towering like silent sentinels. As I walked, the feeling of being watched intensified, the presence of unseen eyes tracking my every step. The snow fell harder, the wind howling like the cries of lost souls, making it nearly impossible to hear my own thoughts. Desperate to find my way back, I pressed on, the forest becoming a maze of endless white. Just when I thought I couldn't go any further, I saw the faint outline of my tent in the distance, a beacon of hope amidst the desolation. Relief washed over me as I quickened my pace, my legs aching from the relentless trek. But as I drew closer, I realized something was wrong. The tent was gone, replaced by an expanse of untouched snow. My heart sank as I frantically searched the area, calling out my friends' names, but there was no response, no sign of them, no indication of their whereabouts. Fear gnawed at me as I realized I was alone, lost in the heart of the frozen wilderness with no way out. The whispers of the past, the cries of the lost, and the ghostly presence of the child all seemed to converge, creating a nightmare from which there was no escape. I fell to my knees, tears freezing on my cheeks, as the realization of my situation settled in. I was trapped, a lone soul in a haunted forest, unable to find my way back. Hours passed in a blur of fear and desperation, the night stretching on endlessly as I wandered through the snow-covered trails, the oppressive presence never leaving me. My body grew numb from the cold, my mind teetering on the brink of madness as the spirits of the forest toyed with my sanity. The crying, the whispers, and the ghostly apparitions were constant reminders of the tragic events that had unfolded here, a history of loss and sorrow that now claimed me as its latest victim. Just as I was about to succumb to exhaustion, I saw a flicker of light ahead, a faint, welcoming glow that seemed to promise salvation. Summoning every ounce of strength, I pushed forward, the light growing brighter with each step until I found myself at the edge of a frozen stream. Across the icy expanse stood a small cabin, its windows glowing warmly in the cold night. Relief surged through me as I approached the cabin, the door hanging open as if inviting me inside. I stepped through the threshold, the warmth enveloping me like a comforting embrace. Inside, the cabin was simple but cozy, with a roaring fire in the hearth and a pot of stew simmering on the stove. The scent of pine and wood smoke filled the air, offering a stark contrast to the frigid wilderness outside. I sank onto a chair by the fire, my body shaking from cold and fear. As I began to regain my composure, I noticed something strange. The cabin was completely empty, no sign of anyone else. The sense of warmth and safety was now replaced by an eerie silence, the flickering flames casting long, dancing shadows across the room. Suddenly, the door swung open with a loud bang, and the woman in red appeared once more, standing at the threshold with her hollow eyes fixed on me. Her presence was both haunting and sorrowful, her empty eyes reflecting a deep, unspoken pain. "Don't follow her," she whispered, her voice filled with despair. "Don't let her take you." I froze, the realization hitting me hard. She wasn't just a spirit, she was a guardian of the forest, a protector bound by tragedy to prevent others from falling into the same fate. Her presence was a reminder of the lost souls who had been claimed by the wilderness, their spirits forever wandering the snow-covered trails. Determined to break the cycle and help her find peace, I reached out to her, my voice steady despite the fear that still gripped me. "I'm sorry for what happened. Let me help you." She hesitated, her form flickering like a candle in the wind, before slowly nodding. "You must remember us," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. "Our stories must be told." Understanding dawned on me. I had to honor the memory of those lost souls, to share their stories so they wouldn't be forgotten. With renewed purpose, I spent the rest of the night in the cabin, writing down everything I had experienced, the encounters, the whispers, and the haunting presence of the child and the woman in white. As dawn broke, the cabin began to fade, the warmth giving way to the cold morning air. The spirits were finally at peace, their stories preserved in my journal. I left the cabin with a sense of fulfillment, the haunted forest no longer a place of fear but a sanctuary of remembrance and honor. The journey back to civilization was arduous, the snow now a mere memory beneath my weary feet. But the experience had changed me, deepening my connection to the wilderness and the spirits that guarded its secrets. The stories of the lost and the restless would now be told, their echoes preserved in the heart of the Rocky Mountains. Years have passed since that transformative winter trek, and I've continued my work as a writer, always mindful of the legends that whisper through the snow-covered trails. The story of the child and the woman in white has become a part of my personal lore, a haunting yet beautiful reminder of the thin veil that separates our world from the restless spirits that seek peace. Sometimes, during late-night shifts, I catch a glimpse of a white dress swaying gently in the distance, a silent guardian watching over the trail with eyes that no longer hold fear, but the quiet assurance of peace found at last. And I know that some souls find their way home, their whispers forever lingering in the silent snow, waiting to be remembered and honored by those who dare to seek the truth. Story number 6. The Roar in the Night. Winter in White Mountain National Forest was a formidable force. The once vibrant trails were now hidden beneath thick blankets of snow, rendering them nearly impassable. The biting cold clawed at exposed skin, and the howling winds whispered secrets through the towering pines. Despite the harsh conditions, a small group of friends, Jake, Laura, Megan, and myself, decided to embark on an adventurous winter hike, seeking both the thrill of isolation and the serene beauty of the snow-covered wilderness. I'm Ethan Parker, an amateur photographer with a deep appreciation for nature's untouched landscapes. Our group had planned this trip meticulously, equipping ourselves with sturdy gear, ample supplies, and a sense of camaraderie that only longtime friends can share. The trail we chose was one of the less frequented paths, promising solitude and the perfect canvas for my winter photography. The first day of our hike was everything we had hoped for. The sun cast a soft glow over the pristine snow, creating a shimmering blanket that stretched as far as the eye could see. We trekked through dense forests, crossed frozen streams, and marveled at the stark beauty of the untouched wilderness. As night fell, we set up camp in a secluded clearing, the warmth of our shared tent a stark contrast to the frigid air outside. As the night deepened, the wind picked up, howling through the trees with an almost sentient intensity. We huddled around the campfire, sharing stories and laughter, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows on our faces. The tranquility of the moment was profound, broken only by the occasional crackle of burning wood and the distant call of a lone owl. Around midnight, a heavy silence settled over the forest, as if nature itself was holding its breath. It was then that we heard it, a deep, resonant growl that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the woods. The sound was unlike anything we had heard before, a primal roar that sent shivers down our spines. "Did you guys hear that?" Megan whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Jake nodded, his hand instinctively reaching for the flashlight strapped to his belt. Laura clutched her sleeping bag tighter, her face pale in the firelight. The growling continued, fluctuating in intensity, as if the creature was circling our camp. I grabbed my camera, trying to steady my trembling hands. "Maybe it's a bear," I suggested, though I knew White Mountain wasn't home to any large predators like grizzlies. "Probably just a wolf or something." "Wolves aren't known for this kind of growl," Jake replied, his voice tense. "We should stay inside the tent until it passes." We all agreed, retreating into the safety of our shared space. The tent felt small and vulnerable against the vast, unforgiving wilderness outside. The growling persisted, growing louder and more agitated, echoing through the silent forest. Suddenly, the sound of heavy footsteps and scratching echoed around us, the fabric of our tent vibrating with each impact. My heart pounded in my chest as I listened, every nerve on high alert. The sounds were coming from all around us, as if something was trying to break into our sanctuary. Laura gasped, her eyes wide with terror. "Someone's outside." Jake grabbed his flashlight and cautiously unzipped the tent, the beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. We strained our eyes, trying to make out any movement in the shadows, but all we saw were the swaying trees and the thick blanket of snow. Just as I began to relax, assuming it was a lost hiker or another animal, a massive silhouette loomed at the edge of the clearing. The creature was enormous, its body covered in thick, black fur that seemed to absorb the light around it. Its eyes glowed a piercing red, fixed intently on us from the depths of the forest. There was no shadow beneath it, no sign of where its legs ended, only the eerie glow of its eyes staring into our very souls. The growling intensified, now accompanied by a low, guttural snarl that reverberated through the cold night air. The creature took a step forward, the snow crunching under its weight, yet it moved with an unnatural grace that defied its size. We stood frozen, fear rooting us to the spot as the reality of the situation sank in. "Run!" Jake shouted, breaking the paralysis that held us captive. Without waiting for a second, we bolted from the tent, the adrenaline fueling our desperate flight through the snow-covered trail. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees twisting into menacing shapes as we sprinted blindly in the direction of our trailhead. The creature pursued us relentlessly, its growls and snarls echoing through the night, each step bringing it closer. My flashlight flickered in my hand, casting erratic beams of light that barely penetrated the darkness. Breathless and terrified, we navigated the treacherous terrain, the cold biting at our faces and the snow making every step a battle against the elements. Behind us, the sounds of pursuit never ceased, the creature's presence a constant reminder of the danger we faced. After what felt like an eternity, we reached the main trail, the forest beginning to thin as we neared the safety of civilization. But our ordeal was far from over. As we stumbled onto the well-traveled path, gasping for breath, we turned to see the creature still chasing us, its red eyes gleaming ominously in the dim light. "Keep going," Laura urged, her voice barely audible over the sound of our pounding hearts. We pushed ourselves harder, sprinting towards the nearest ranger station, the sanctuary of human presence, a beacon of hope in the desolate wilderness. The trail was long and unforgiving, each step a reminder of the terrifying encounter we had just endured. But the thought of the creature behind us, its relentless pursuit fueling our desperation, kept us moving forward. Finally, after what felt like an endless struggle, we burst through the trees and stumbled into the ranger station, collapsing onto the cold floor, our bodies numb from the cold and exhaustion. The room was empty, the flickering light of the desk lamp the only source of illumination. We lay there, catching our breath, the reality of our survival sinking in. Silence enveloped us, broken only by the sound of our ragged breathing and the distant howling of the wind. But our relief was short-lived. As we sat there, trying to comprehend what had happened, a series of large footprints appeared on the window pane, circling our feet in the snow before vanishing into the darkness outside. Panic surged through us once more as the realization hit, we were not alone. The creature had found us, its presence now sealed within the confines of the ranger station. We exchanged terrified glances, knowing that our ordeal was far from over. Suddenly, the lights flickered and dimmed, the room plunged into darkness. The temperature dropped drastically, our breath visible in the frigid air. A low, guttural growl echoed through the room, and the door slammed shut with a force that sent shivers down our spines. "We're trapped," Jake whispered, his voice trembling with fear. The growling grew louder, the sound reverberating off the walls, filling the room with an overwhelming sense of dread. The creature's presence was now a palpable force, its eyes burning red in the darkness, staring hungrily at us from the shadows. Desperation set in as we realized we had no way out, the ranger station now our prison against the relentless predator. Laura clutched her sleeping bag tightly, her eyes wide with terror, while Megan and Jake huddled together, trying to find comfort in each other's presence. I knew we had to act quickly if we wanted to survive. Summoning every ounce of courage, I grabbed my phone, the screen dead despite my attempts to turn it on. "There's nothing we can do," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the creature's growling. But then, a faint voice broke through the darkness, a whisper that echoed in my mind. "Remember the past, honor the lost." Confusion and fear battled within me as I tried to make sense of the cryptic message. It was then that I noticed a faded photograph on the desk, half buried in the snow. I reached out, my fingers trembling as I picked it up. The photograph depicted a group of hikers from the 1970s, their faces filled with joy and camaraderie, standing on the very trail we had traversed. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the truth. We were reenacting a tragedy that had occurred decades ago. The creature was not just a beast of the wilderness, but a restless spirit, bound by the sorrow and loss of those who had perished on this very trail. Determined to honor their memory and appease the vengeful spirit, I spoke to the creature, my voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at my insides. "We're sorry for intruding on your rest. We didn't know, please let us go." The growling softened, the red eyes still burning but now filled with a hint of sorrow. The temperature in the room began to rise, the oppressive cold giving way to a sense of peace. The creature's form began to shift, becoming more defined yet still retaining its otherworldly presence. "You must remember, honor our memory," the voice echoed again, this time clearer and filled with a profound sadness. "Do not let our story be forgotten." As I spoke those words, the atmosphere in the ranger station changed. The heavy presence that had weighed down the room lifted, replaced by a serene calm that filled the space. The creature's form began to dissolve, the red eyes fading as I nodded, feeling the weight of their plea settling within me. "We will remember your story and honor your memory." The creature's presence faded completely, the room growing quiet once more. The oppressive cold lifted, replaced by a comfortable warmth that enveloped us. The door to the ranger station creaked open slowly, and a soft light filtered through, signaling the arrival of morning. Exhausted but relieved, we stumbled out into the dawn light, the snow-covered trail now peaceful and serene. The first rays of sunlight pierced through the trees, casting a golden glow over the landscape. We huddled together, grateful to be alive and free from the terror that had plagued us. As we made our way back to civilization, the memories of that night lingered, a haunting reminder of the thin veil between the living and the dead. We knew that the spirits of the lost hikers would forever roam the trails of White Mountain, their stories etched into the fabric of the wilderness, waiting to be remembered by those who dared to tread their path. In the days that followed, I felt a deep sense of responsibility to share our experience, to ensure that the tragic tale of the lost hikers was never forgotten. I began writing, my fingers moving swiftly across the keyboard, capturing every detail of our harrowing encounter. The story became my mission, a way to honor the memory of those who had perished and to warn others of the restless spirits that guarded the frozen trails. Years have passed since that fateful winter hike, and I've continued my work as a writer, always mindful of the legends that whisper through the snow-covered trails of White Mountain. The story of our encounter became a part of the park's rich tapestry of mysteries, a testament to the enduring power of memory and the human spirit's capacity for compassion. Sometimes, during late-night shifts or solitary hikes, I catch a glimpse of a shadowy figure in the distance, a reminder of the night we faced the supernatural and helped restless spirits find their way to peace. The echoes of their cries and the haunting presence of the creature remain etched in my mind, a constant reminder of the thin veil that separates our world from the unknown. And so, as I continue to explore the untamed beauty of America's wilderness, I carry with me the lessons learned from that night, the importance of remembering the past, the power of empathy to bridge the gap between the living and the dead, and the enduring hope that even in the darkest moments, there is a chance for peace and closure.